And he's like, cool, so what's going to be your price to Walgreens and what's going to be your price to this one? And we're like, oh, well, it's going to be $12. And he's like, wait, it's going to be $12 for this retailer and it's going to be $12 for this retailer? And we're like, yeah. He's like, oh no, kid, you don't know anything.
That's not how retail works. Drug is a high-low retailer. Walmart's an everyday low-price retailer. Imagine building an 8-figure brand without an MBA or a business background and starting fresh out of college. That's exactly what Brooks Powell, founder and CEO of Cheers, did. And in today's episode of Scaling Emerging Beauty, Brooks shares how he scaled Cheers into the multi-million-dollar category-creating brand, starting with just $200,000, not just. $200,000 is a lot of money, but starting with $200,000 and a lot of hustle. Brooks talks about the fascinating neuroscience research that sparked Cheers as a brand, how to survive and thrive after Shark Tank, even if you don't make a deal, and what happens when Facebook and Instagram ads suddenly stop working. I think we're all in that boat right now where marketing is just really, really expensive. And it's like, how do we reach our consumer when they're not sharing information? Oh, so tough. We also talk a little bit about Cheers' strategy in hiring folks. He didn't necessarily hire people who had the skill set, but more so look for things like a culture fit and a desire for learning. It was absolutely fascinating to sit down with Brooks and to hear how he defied many of the things that you will typically hear and grew this amazing brand. I think you'll truly enjoy the story, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with you all afterwards. Let's go ahead and get right into the episode. As of the published date of this episode, I am an associate of Ulta Beauty. The ideas and thoughts represented here are my own and not that of my employer. Brooks, I'm so excited to be sitting down and talking to you today. I mean, this is the first time that we're talking live, but I followed you on LinkedIn for a while here and think you just have one of those really cool founder stories that, especially when it comes to scale, you're very transparent about things. And so I'm excited to share this with my audience. So I'd love for you to just start off, give us a little bit of an intro about who you are. I know you started the brand in college, which is already impressive. And it's grown tremendously, which again, doubly impressive. So just tell us a little bit about Cheers, about how you started it and where it kind of is today.
Yeah. So kind of the funny story and the backstory of Cheers is I was born and raised in the suburbs of Houston. And the plan was for me to be a Baptist minister. So I was a phenomenal swimmer in high school. I set the state record my senior year, was 8th fastest 50 freestyler in the nation, high school swimmer in the nation. Was not good enough to go to the Olympics in the United States because these were the Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte years. And they kind of took all the spots for the United States. But I was a good enough swimmer to get into a college I probably couldn't have gotten into otherwise. So I went to Princeton. I was a religion major. And obviously, they're not going to teach you, seminary or anything like that. But I loved reading and writing and ethics and philosophy and all of that. And there was a professor I really wanted to study under that specialized in Christian ethics. So while I was there, I took a class outside of my major that was a neuroscience course. And in that neuroscience course, the midterm project was to write a 12-page paper on a drug of your choice. And so the idea is that if you could basically explain how a drug works, how it gets you high, how it makes you feel good, how it then makes you feel bad, how it gets you addicted, how it messes up your brain, and you could use neuroscience nomenclature, it's a fun project to prove to your professor that you've actually been paying attention and know how the brain works, right? So I picked alcohol. At this time, Google Scholar was really kind of coming on to the scene. This is, 2013. So I'm on Google Scholar and I'm searching terms like alcohol, neuroscience. And right place, right time, I come across an article that had just been published in the Journal of Neuroscience titled Dihydramycin as a Novel Anti-Intoxication Medication, which is a mouthful. But basically,
I was going to say that 3 times really fast.
Yeah, so we can use DHM for short. That's the acronym for dihydramycin. Basically, what they found is that this dihydramycin molecule, it's a flavonoid that comes from a plant typically used in East Asia, where they would historically steep it in a tea. And at the tips of the tea leaves, what you would find is that these things are about 50% pure dihydromycetiine by mass. So if you just chop off the tips of the tea leaves, brew it, you're going to have a pretty high dose of dihydromycetiine. And allegedly, it would make you, if you had this after consuming alcohol or the next day, it would support your liver and make you feel better. Well, this team at UCLA basically said, okay, well, what if we just take a super high dose of dihydromycetiine and inject it into rats? And what they found was that they could instantly sober up rats. So what they would do is do something called an oral gavage. So if you've ever been to Bourbon Street and they take that big thing that looks like a needle, the syringe, at Bourbon Street, they'll put it into your mouth and like squirt it into your mouth. That's what a oral gavage is. So what they do is they'd give rats the equivalent of like 15 standard drinks. Obviously, these rats are trash. Then they would follow it up with a injection of dihydromycetiine into the tail of these rats. And they found they could instantly sober them up. So they're like, okay, well, that's interesting. So then what they did is they took rats that were bred to become alcoholic. So you can basically breed rats to have all kinds of things. And then you can buy these rats that already have these genetic mutations. And so what they did is they took these rats that were bred to become alcoholic and they left them in a cage with food, water, and alcohol. And the control group didn't have any dihydromycetiine. And the test group, they put the dihydromycetiine into the alcohol. And so as these rats drank alcohol, they were also getting dosed with dihydromycetiine. And this is what becomes fascinating. They all drank the same amount of alcohol the first week or so. And then all of a sudden, so they're getting like the buzz, they get like the social aspect of it, right? They're feeling good from the alcohol. But then the control group just, all of a sudden their alcohol consumption patterns just spike until they're drinking 5 times more per week than they were originally. Then they kind of reach a cap, right? There's a max to how much alcohol you can consume. And that they basically reach that cap within like 3 or 4 weeks. Whereas the dihydromycetiine group would still drink alcohol, but they never increase their alcohol consumption patterns over time. Then what they did is they took the control group and then they added dihydromycetiine into their alcohol source. And then they came right back down to baseline levels of alcohol consumption, which is fascinating because of what it suggests is that they still drink alcohol. They're still getting the pleasure from the alcohol, but they're not developing the addictive patterns to it over time. Then they did a few more studies, and what they found is that you could actually prevent rats from getting hangovers, which then begs the question, how do you test hangovers in rats? And there's 3 ways. So typically a rat will sit with its paws kind of real close together, but a hungover rat will have its paws real spread out and kind of droop their head. So you can actually measure like basically however spread out their paws are. That's kind of
how much they've had to drink. Yes.
Then what they do is they put them in a maze and see how quickly they do the maze. And obviously, hungover rats perform way worse. And then this is a little sad, but you can do seizure threshold testing. So alcohol is a depressant, and when it leaves your bloodstream, it ends up having the opposite effect. And that's where a lot of that anxiety comes from, the irritability, the stress, all of that, the day after drinking. So really, the day after drinking alcohol, your risk of having a seizure actually goes way up. So what they do to these rats is they flash varying intensity of light to see how long it takes for them to go into seizure. And then that's probably the most objective measure to understand how much short-term alcohol withdrawal they're undergoing. And basically, dihydromycetiine reduced all of those. So I wrote my whole 12-page paper on this article, of course. I then send it to my professor. He actually gets so excited about it, he scraps the planned class lecture and lectures on this instead. And this was all like groundbreaking news because it had just been published in the Journal of Neuroscience. He then came to me and said, hey, are you thinking about turning this into a business or something? Because I would love to be involved as an advisor. That, all of a sudden, the light bulbs went off. And so, I think it's really funny. I have this Baptist minister background. I'm still very Christian, still very religious, still think that you should drink responsibly. And then yet I have a product that's called Cheers, and it's an after alcohol aid. And you take 3 capsules after your last alcoholic beverage or before going to bed. And its claim to fame is that it'll support your liver and make you feel like you had roughly half as many drinks the next day or your money back, which some people could say is like a hangover prevention product. So Baptist minister to hangover prevention doesn't feel like it fits. And yet, when you go look at all the academic literature, you look at the science, what you find is that getting dihydromycin into people around the time of consuming alcohol should, in theory, make people drink less over time and have a better relationship with alcohol. And the idea is that a lot of people think, oh, well, if they don't get hangovers, they'll just drink more. One, that's reductionistic. It sort of assumes that you would drink more just because you're not going to feel bad the next day. But there's a lot of reasons you wouldn't drink more, such as you don't want to act like a fool at a party, or you want to drive home, or you don't want the calories, or whatever, right? But one of the reasons people get stuck when it comes to drinking alcohol is because one of the easiest ways to get over a hangover is just drink more alcohol the next day. Because you're undergoing short-term alcohol withdrawal, if you have a Bloody Mary or hair of the dog or whatever, as you start drinking more alcohol the next day, you immediately start feeling better because you are now curing this withdrawal, but you're not curing it. It's like paying off a credit card with another credit card that's just due later in the month. Like, you haven't got rid of the problem, you just shifted the balance. So anyways, I ended up working with 2 Princeton professors. They became equity holding advisors in the company. I spent the next 2 years figuring out the laws, the supply chain, the branding, all of that. The original researchers wanted to go like the prescription drug pharmaceutical route. I was a D1 athlete at the time. I'm kind of short for a swimmer, so I've always been trying to get an edge. So I was using creatine monohydrate long before all the other athletes were using creatine monohydrate. I was big into the supplement industry and basically realized that this could probably be sold as a dietary supplement in the United States. So we figured out all of that, raised $200,000 right prior to graduated in June of 2017. And then we very quickly got into Facebook and Instagram advertising, driving traffic to our website and Amazon and selling there. By the end of the year, we were run rating about $1 million. So like if
by the end of 2017?
Yeah, so if you just took like our December numbers and then multiplied it by 12, it'd be like $1 million. We were run rating $1 million.
Got it. Okay. I mean, that's still really, really amazing. It's showing that you definitely have a proof of concept.
Yes, exactly. And then our big break is, we're really hitting the Facebook and Instagram ads hard. And by mid-February, we were probably run rating a little over 2 million a year. And then the end of February 2018, we aired on the season finale of Shark Tank. And that's when all heck broke loose. So we aired on the season finale of Shark Tank, and like that day we did 100,000 that first evening. Then the second day we did 100,000. And then the third day we did 100,000. And then it eventually, started coming down to like 70 and 50 and all this. And I had seen so many brands that go on Shark Tank where they have this big spike, and then at the end of the week, it's gone. And like literally 2 months later, it's like they never even aired on Shark Tank. And so I was so focused that we are going to hold the line. Whatever our spike gets to, we're going to hold half of it, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. So we ended up doing $1 million in March of 2018. So basically from that Shark Tank airing. And then after that, we basically never dropped below $500,000 a month in revenue there on out. And we were primarily driving it all through Facebook and Instagram ads.
Wow. That is so impressive. I have to back things up a little bit because you said so much, and this is just really fascinating. So first question, easy one. Did you make a deal on Shark Tank? And if so, who did you make a deal with?
No deal.
Okay. So sometimes Shark Tank is just good for the visibility. I do have brands ask, if I don't make a deal, is that a good or bad thing? And I'm thinking, no. I mean, I know Melissa Butler, someone else I know who has, built a good brand with a lip bar from, she kind of jokes like Mr. Big said no. I don't think it's Mr. Big. That's my Sex and the City reference, but you know who I'm talking about. Mr.
Yes,
Wonderful.
Mr. Wonderful.
Mr.
Yep.
Wonderful. He said no. But still, you can have success even if you don't get the deal on Shark Tank. Do you think that you were able to maintain that baseline of revenue due to your Facebook and Instagram advertising? Or do you think it was because this product was so good and so necessary in the market that when people found it, they were like, oh, this is good and I can't have without it? A little bit of both? Just curious.
I think it's both. I think we would get to the same place that we are at today if we didn't air on Shark Tank. I think what the Shark Tank airing did for us is it pulled a lot of future demand right into the present. So it was, we got in front of 5 million Americans for 12 minutes, and they got to hear the whole story, hear how the science works, and really buy into this vision of, if you're going to drink alcohol, why wouldn't you take a product designed to support your liver and make you feel better the next day? Because time is money, productivity is money, how you feel is money. So why not trade $3 to feel better the next day? And then obviously through that whole process, we proved the science, and it was really entertaining. And so I think what that was it was basically like we just did one really big 12-minute TV advertisement. And I think what it did is it just showed that there is a lot of demand for a product like this, but the hardest part about this brand is going to be education.
So true. Have any of the sharks ever reached out and said, we're mad we didn't make a deal?
No, I don't think it's in their nature to do that.
Okay, just had to ask, because sometimes it's like, I wonder how they feel. So what a cool story. You got on Shark Tank, which, by the way, even getting on Shark Tank, having been less than a year into business is what it sounds like. It's also, obviously the producer saw something there. Where then did you start selling, or when did you start selling at retail? Can you tell us a little bit through that scaled growth? So you were just DTC, Facebook and Instagram ads. When did you join Amazon? When did you, go to, I know you're at a number of retailers now, but like, who was that first retail partner? How did you kind of scale and grow in that way?
Absolutely. So the way our story looks is graduated 2017. We did like $500,000 in revenue 2017. That was just Facebook and Instagrams driven to our website, and then that would spill over to Amazon. So almost from day one, we were 50% website sales, 50% Amazon sales. And the reason is that people with a product like this, shipping speed matters. So we have a ton of brand loyalty, but if we're not there and somebody needs a product like this, they may try to switch brands or something. So we need to be everywhere with the fastest shipping and the best brand and the best product and the best everything. But what we know is that for this brand, shipping speed matters. This isn't a piece of clothing you're willing to wait a week to come in. This is like, I have a wedding that's coming. I need to get it soon. So Amazon's always been a big part of our business. 2018, we jumped up to 7.3 million revenue, but we lost $1 million that year. And we raised venture capital basically halfway through 2018. So you can do the math. You can't really go from 500K revenue to 7.3 million without having a huge cash flow problem. And so we knew, and I'm less than a year out of college, 23 at the time or something, like come from a middle-class family. No one was going to give us like a big line of credit or something like that. The other thing about Shark Tank is no one knows, did you just get lucky, or is this like a brand that actually has staying power? So it actually puts a lot of noise into the equation because people don't know if like it was just luck or not. And, it's not like you get to do a Shark Tank airing once a year or something. So we end up raising venture capital. We raised $2.1 million on a $14 million post-money valuation. And then we finished that year 7.3 million, but we lose $1 million. And that's primarily because we were just hitting the advertising so hard. And then we had a frivolous lawsuit that made us change our name from Thrive Plus to Cheers after the Shark Tank airing, which is like a pretty normal thing, as you'll see some lawsuits come in the mail after being on Shark Tank. So we had to get through all of that. So then 2019 hits. We're still Facebook, Instagram ads driven to website. Amazon, we do 8.5 million, but we only lose 300,000. And halfway through that year, we flipped profitable. And then 2020 hits, and at first it was real scary. But then, customer acquisition came roaring back, and we ended up doing 10.4 million in revenue that year with basically 2 million profit. And so, 3 years out of college thinking, wow, this whole business stuff is easy. And then there's a change that Apple made called iOS 14.5. And
Very aware of that. Yes.
What that change did is it really ruined digital advertising, but it wasn't equal in the brands, what ended up happening. So what iOS 14.5 was is it did not allow Facebook or Instagram to track anything that you did outside of the app. So it used to be the case that if Monique went to a bar, Facebook knew. And if you went to a liquor store, Facebook knew. And it even, I'm pretty sure had transaction data too. So if you bought beer somewhere or something, it knew. So Facebook.
So for privacy reasons, potentially for the right reasons, they allowed us to opt out of it, but it did make it a lot harder for brands.
So 95% of people opted out. So
Right.
overnight, you got only you basically lost, 19 out of 20 people's data sets. And it's not like Facebook can figure out if you're interested in alcohol and you drink alcohol and stuff just from your behavior on the app. So when that happened, it was bad for every brand, but it was like really bad for Cheers. So we then entered what we consider the wilderness years, where all of a sudden revenue came down to 8 million. We couldn't acquire new customers. And we were making like a little bit of money, but we were basically treading water. And we then tried like to launch a second brand, and we did some dumb things. So we call it the wilderness years because it feels like we wasted 2 years. Then we got a tip from a friend, and he said, you have to go to the National Association of Chain Drugstores Total Store Expo.
NACDS, I've been there before. I started in OTC, as I told you before the call.
And so we go to that, and we have to do this on a shoestring budget, and like we planned the thing overnight. We've never done a trade show before. We no idea what to expect. And the first day of NACDS TSE is the Meet the Market, where you have speed dating with retailers. And essentially the second meeting we have is with Walmart. And one of these merchants goes, oh my gosh, this product's amazing. It's incremental. It's a basket builder. It solves a clear and defined need state. And he kind of just rattled.
Probably pretty small. Like, it's not like you're taking up a ton of space on the shelf. I mean, I've been a merchant. I can imagine that that's like, you're going to really help my business grow, which is what every merchant loves to hear.
So he rattled off all of these like key selling points for Cheers. And me and my wife are there, we're kind of the salespeople. And we're like, wait, slow down. So we wrote down all the key points. And then, thankfully that was our second Meet the Market meeting of the day. And we had like 18 other ones. So we just used those key selling points for every other meeting. It's an incremental basket builder that solves a clear and defined need state. Basically, I mean, it was crazy. Right out of the gate, 1/3 of the retailers were at yes. I mean, so basically it was like Albertsons was at yes. Meijer was at yes. Wegmans was at yes. Walgreens was at yes. And so we had all these retailers that were at yes, and we didn't even know. So later, we went to a cocktail party, the Emerson cocktail party, and we ran into another VP of sales. And this, we're telling him about how awesome the NACDS Total Store Expo has been for us so far. And he's like, cool. So what's going to be your price to Walgreens, and what's going to be your price to this one? And, and we're like, oh, well, it's going to be $12. And he's like, wait, it's going to be $12 for this retailer, and it's going to be $12 for this retailer. And we're like, yeah. He's like, oh no, kid, you don't know anything.
That's not how retail works. Drug is a high-low retailer. Walmart's an everyday low price retailer. Yeah.
So we didn't know anything. We knew what we did is we had a product that has done well on e-com. It has clear product market fit. And then, we found that we have product market retailer fit, right? We have retailers that are willing to sell it. But then it was like, we have to learn how this whole system works really quickly. So we brought that guy on as an advisor. And in basically 1 week, he sat down and helped us build out a pricing matrix across all of our channels. So within that first week of getting retailers to start saying yes to Cheers, we already knew what our Costco pricing architecture was going to be within that first week. Like, we figured out, really, we mapped out the whole thing through a series of 5 2-hour meetings that were all held from 8 to 10 p.m. the first week, because he works a full job and you know what I mean? That was the only time we could.
That you met that person. I mean, I always say there's a little bit of whatever you want to call it, luck, providence, a little bit of that, I feel like, in every story, because had you not met that VP, you would have had to find the right person to help you with that. And who knows what that would have looked like. But that's amazing. So you find that, you get your pricing together. How many of those retailers do you end up launching at? Like, what's the timeline look like?
Yeah. So after that, it then becomes basically what retailers, when are the resets, and who has kind of a rolling distribution model, right? So Wegmans, I think, technically was first to bring us in. No, so actually, Hy-Vee was actually first. And what's funny is Hy-Vee, their new CEO, he walks by the booth, and like my wife and I went to lunch. We were gone from the booth for 15 minutes, and I was telling my wife we should not leave. She's like, it's 15 minutes. No one's came by in the last like 30 minutes. Like, we'll be okay. We come back to the booth, and there's a business card sitting on it that says, call me. And it's Jeremy's business card. So we call him. He comes back to the booth, and he basically negotiates like full floor displays, $250,000 to go in like that Q4. And so that was like our first like, big pop into retail. Then Wegmans hit also in Q4. And then, Walgreens was, sort of at yes, but we still had to go through the line review, and then you had to wait for the reset. So you're kind of waiting for all of this stuff to kind of come around. And then it was Albertsons and everything. So, and then a lot of these retailers, except for like Hy-Vee, no one really went big into it. So Walgreens gave us like 2 SKUs, 1,000 doors, for the first year. And so really what happened to us is basically it was 2023 was like laying the foundation. We're getting so we had a lot of banners that were bringing Cheers in, but they were bringing it in a very test type manner. Not many SKUs, not many doors, and not very prominent place on the shelf either. And then 2024, all of a sudden, we did well 2023, doing well, 2024. All of these retailers start taking us from a small amount of SKUs and distribution into their, to like basically full chain and more SKUs.
Right.
And now 2025, all of a sudden it's like, okay, wow, these retail numbers are looking really good because now we have more SKUs, more doors.
Distribution. Yeah.
And the velocities are really, hitting pretty hard as well. So it's one of those things. It's kind of been a multi-year rollout, but it's actually pretty crazy. So we started efforts with National Association of Chain Drugstores Total Set Expo in 2022. And by middle of this year, with our next reset or two, we'll be at 32,000 doors.
Wow. I mean, congratulations. That is really impressive. I'm curious because most brands don't have that type of success right out the gate, right out the gate. I mean, I'm thinking even in my time in buying, when I brought in This Is Elle, it was successful like that. But these are like rare gems, I feel like, where you're like, whoa, this is so successful. A lot to learn from those. So like, but seriously, like pat yourself and your team on the back. I'm curious, when Hy-Vee went all in, were you hitting their forecasts? Were you doubling their forecasts? And then you talked a little bit earlier on about like, yeah, I graduated, learned supply chain and all that. And I'm like, well, I meant to ask you to back it up there because like, how does a religion major who took one class in neuroscience then also learn supply chain? Just take us through like how, if you were scaling this quickly, you had that injection of investment from VC. So that's how you funded that. But then how did you gain the knowledge of this? Because at the time, your team, it sounds like you and your wife, Shelby, but then who else is on the team? Are you also like are you naturally just like a supply chain ops guy? Were you the marketing genius? Was she the marketing genius? Like walk me through your team a little bit, because I also think some of the success is because it sounds like you have a team that had the right skill set, was able to pick things up. In addition to that pre-iOS era was golden times for digital marketing.
So I think probably the most interesting thing about the Cheers team is that there is not a single person on our team until recently, and I mean like within the last 6 months with the hiring of our controller, that is classically trained in whatever role that they play at Cheers. So I was a religion major at Princeton, which basically meant that I did a lot of thinking, reading, and writing. And what I would say, though, is that business is, 9/10 of business is problem solving, whether that's supply chain or that's data when it comes to advertising, or that's figuring out brick and mortar. All of these are problems to be solved. And when you're such a small, young team, there's a lot of problems laying around, and there's really no room for specializing early in a business. And so people ask, like, okay, well, how did you figure out all this out? And what I would say is just one step in front of the other. Like in the early days, it was like, how much inventory should we get? It's like, okay, well, we raised $200,000. I don't know, maybe we should get like $100,000 worth of inventory. You know what I mean? A lot of this stuff was kind of lick your finger, put it in the air, and you figure it out. Now, obviously, our COO is amazing. He's so extremely sophisticated. He's built out the world's best models to sort of, predict demand and the rates at which our different products sell. And so we're never buying, far more inventory of this one SKU that only sells at 8% of this other SKU. So those systems kind of get built out and perfected over time. So I think what we've gotten really lucky at is we've gotten really good problem solvers into the business. So people who have a big brain, they're willing to work hard, and they're willing to try new things and figure things out. And that's really kind of what we've built our team around. And that's given us a lot of flexibility as well, because sometimes, someone may start in this part of the organization, and next thing you know, they're in this part of the organization. But they're really good at thinking, reading, writing, problem solving, moving quick. They have the right attitude. And yeah, I mean, like our COO he basically was on the operations research financial engineering Orphe track at Princeton, one of the hardest workers I know. He was on the wrestling team, and then he went and worked for Prudential's fixed income group. And so we brought him in originally as like director of finance and analytics. And then, he basically eventually the board gave him the big COO title, which, by the way, in young companies, when you have a young founder and a young CEO, they typically like to reserve the COO spot for as long as possible, because they don't know if they need to come bring some 50 or 60-year-old in to kind of rein in the kids. Right. And so it was a really big deal when the board came in and said, okay, you're amazing. Let's make you COO now. But yeah, I mean, that's basically how we figured everything out is put one foot in front of the other and kind of figure it out as you go. And hopefully you don't make any mistakes that are so catastrophic that you can't kind of go change them later. So, for example, something that could have been catastrophic is not knowing what a pricing matrix is. You then get into all these retailers, and then a year later, you're trying to have the world's most awkward conversations like, hey,
price increases. It would not have been bad. It wouldn't have been good.
Yeah. So now our belief is experts are really, really expensive, but it's their time that's expensive. And so we've had a lot of luck. What we do is we go find the best experts we can and pay them as either a consultant or give them some equity to be an advisor. But we don't have them do the work themselves. What we do is have them teach someone on our team how these things get done. And so what that does is it allows us to it gives us the big brains of someone who's been in the industry forever, has all the experience, but maybe we're taking 20 hours of their time to like build out something like a pricing matrix, as opposed to being like, we need a VP of sales that's been in this industry for all this time and is going to cost a few $100,000 a year, So we've had a lot of luck getting the right talent that we're sort of homegrown with the right advisors and experts that are involved in the business.
One of the books that I'm reading right now is called Think Again by Adam Grant. I'm not sure. I know you are a reader. I'm not sure if you've read that one.
I haven't read it yet, but I do read a lot.
I think you would like it. It's essentially talking about how many of the things that we've learned aren't necessarily true, aren't necessarily right. And it is really hard for us to think about things differently. So to your point, this idea of like bringing people that are people who ask questions, are people who know how to solve problems, but don't necessarily have these traditional backgrounds. That is, you're kind of already embodying a little bit of what Adam is saying in his book, which is you have those right people, or you have people who can think and know how to learn things. Because even as I think about, as I shared, I'm a mom of 4. My daughters, I don't know that there are going to be the jobs that we have today, what jobs they're going to be able to go for. And so for me, I'm like, how do I teach them what's important. What's important is learning. What's important is being able to read, being able to understand things, being curious, because those are going to be the things that are going to have these jobs in the future, because who knows what they're going to be, versus saying, oh, you should definitely be a CFO. Who knows what AI is going to look like in the future when it comes to those things.
Right.
I did have another question though for the team.
Yeah.
It sounds like most of the people that you hired were friends. I mean, Shelby, as we said, is your wife, but is that kind of the glue? Because I feel like there's something to your team where it's like you still hired, maybe looking back, if you would think of it, would you say there were certain qualities that you looked for? Because I can say from having worked at a number of companies, you can hire people and they can talk a good talk, but that doesn't mean that they're actually going to deliver on what they say. So did you know most of the people that you brought on previously? Were there specific interview practices that you employed? I'm just curious, like, were there ways for you to know you were hiring right people, especially since everyone was young and not an expert at this, which is what you typically hear for emerging brands?
Right. I wouldn't say we're experts at hiring by any means. I think we've had a lot of success basically hiring our friends and people that we knew and pulling them out of completely different industries. I think one of the best members of our team right now was selling insurance and was going to be a firefighter. And now he's basically leading our entire brick and mortar retail sales. And like, we kind of all figured out how brick and mortar works and how retail sales works and all of that over the course of 2 years together. And then, the tracks were kind of laid and it's like, okay, you're the quarterback for this channel now. And all of that happened in 2 years. I think what we're finding is the attitude is more important than experience. And if you kind of get the attitude right now, obviously there still has to be the intellectual chops and the emotional fortitude chops and the ability to handle stress and resilience and work with a team and all of this stuff. But that underlying attitude of, I want to figure this out, I want to turn this into something, I am willing to work hard at this, try new things, get outside of my comfort zone. That has been like the most important thing within our business. That said, there are moments though where you really just need outside expertise. So we've hired a lot for attitude, just from friends, and then we've also now have a few, call them strangers, that we've brought into the team, and they've very quickly become close friends and all of that. So there's not this feeling of like people who are friends before Cheers and people who are after. Like, no, that's not the case at all. But like our sort of most recent U.S. senior hire, we hired a controller because, we're at this point where we really need to professionalize the business. Before Seth, our COO, was having to do the accounting stuff, but like his highest leverage was not going to be on the accounting stuff. We tried hiring like a senior accountant, and that person wasn't, they couldn't run an accounting department. So we just went out and we just got a really amazing senior leader to run our accounting department. And she's been absolutely phenomenal. And you're going, okay, there is a time to home grow, and there is a time where you have a clear and defined problem at the business and you just need that expert internally. It's kind of a build versus buy question. So historically through Cheers, we've had a lot of luck building, but that was kind of like our first example of a buy. And then we've also had a lot of luck hiring internationally and working with recruiters. And when we're hiring internationally, again, a lot of this is we like their attitude. Do they want to learn? Do they want to advance
what
their
we call
career?
cultural fit. That's like the corporate speak. We're saying, what's the culture for the company? And then what's the culture of this person that we're talking to?
So yeah, it's been a lot of going bottom up, not top down, and learning as we go.
I mean, so impressive. So good. Oh, well, look, I feel like we've kind of tackled all the things that I wanted to cover today, but I love to kind of close by asking all of my guests if you could give, one piece of advice to early stage emerging brands, founders, folks on the team, what would you share with them?
I would say go bigger, faster, and be willing to learn as you go. I think everyone just feels like you have to have this perfect roadmap for everything. And you know, people are like, well, how did you become an expert at Facebook and Instagram advertising? It's like by loading ads onto Facebook and seeing what worked and didn't work. And then next thing you know, some are working and some aren't. And then you meet somebody and then they teach you a little bit about how accounts should be structured. And then you make the account structure a certain way. And you're like, oh, wow, everything just got 10% more efficient. It's not like the business could not run without perfect advertising. It's just that you're kind of like 70% there, and then you're 80% there, and then you're 90% there. And so I would say be willing to roll up your sleeves, try things before you're ready, and learn as you go. And that works for most things in business. I think, obviously there's some things like the pricing matrix stuff where failing at your launch into retail would be very costly. So I know this is a little bit of a brick and mortar thing. So I would be cautious with that advice. But for like most other aspects in business, I think the best way to learn is kind of just thrust yourself into the environment and learn as you go, because it's one thing to be watching a sport, right? It's another thing, like, or even think board games. How do you want to learn how to play a board game? Do you want to read all the rules and think about all the strategy ahead of time? Or do you just kind of play the board game for the first time and you start to go, oh, I see how the strategy is here. I want to do this and then do this. And, you kind of you just start playing the game and learning as you go. And I think you can do that far more often than most people would think.
That's so good. That's great advice, Brooks. Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing the journey of Cheers. Again, really impressive. Congratulations and best wishes as you continue to grow and scale the brand.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor.
That wraps up today's episode of Scaling Emerging Beauty. A huge thank you to Brooks Powell for sharing his inspiring journey from writing a college paper. Who knew that college paper would turn into an 8-figure million-dollar business with distribution across 32,000 stores in the US? And we also heard from Brooks' story that it wasn't all success. He didn't get a deal from Shark Tank, but that Shark Tank did give him really great volume and really good visibility. So it shows that even though you might not get the thing that you desire or that you want when you go after a thing, there can still be tangential benefits for you and for your brand in the long run. As always, I love to thank my listeners for checking out the podcast and for giving it a listen. I appreciate you being here. If you aren't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the pod so that you don't miss another episode. I talk about all things scaling, emerging brands. If you like business, if you like beauty, entrepreneurship, it's a fun time over here. And if you thought there were some fun tips from today's episode, DM me on Instagram at Scaling Emerging Beauty. Talk about it and drop a comment below. Let's chat about it. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks as always for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.